What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Ming the Merciless 93 back with part 2 for PokerVIP.com, playing some full ring cash games. And we were talking about what the tournament situation looked like over here on Global Poker with the $5 5K at 5 p.m. And that's a fantastic tournament. So I would suggest you guys jump up in there. All right. We folded our 6-7 offsuit and our 2-6 offsuit. And it looks like I got a dollar pot on table 1 on the 5-7 Jack rainbow board. Checks around. The queen is going to put up a lot of connectivity to hands over here. You're going to have a bunch of straight draws that weren't previously on the board. And you're going to have queen X combos. So I would assume somebody bets here unless all the players just have ace high in pairs. And they're just checking down. We're going to fold ace 3 of the offsuit variety. We get a pot size bet from a $3 stack. And that river card is definitely going to connect to these hands. They're either going to make a hand with 9-10, which might have bet the flop as well because it was a gut shot. Or you're going to have king-10 get there. King-9 makes a pair. And it looks like he's going to get the fold, which is pretty interesting, considering that there were so few chips in stack on the turn. Not a lot of implied odds or anything like that. Looks like Micknick's just trying to get the showdown on the cheap. And we've got our ace 5, so we are going to raise ace 5 suited. This hand has robust playability. Mac is going to call. A 9-10 offsuit is going to be a folding combination. See what the villain has to say. We have a 3-way pot. This is a board texture that is relatively good for us. We have a backdoor straight and flush draw. We're going to use a bigger bet sizing on this board, and we are going to continue when we do pick up equity. We get min raised by Mac, so of course, you know, he might have a bluff here, but a lot of the time it's just going to be a set or king queen or something, and it's going to be pretty difficult to play this hand out of position, even picking up a club and then check calling the turn. So we're just going to make the fold. We're going to raise it up with our ace-6 suited, though, folding down the 8-deuce offsuit. And just kind of keep in mind that that guy is min-raising. It's hard to exactly say what his range is going to be, but mostly value combos or high-equity hands. Maybe some weirdo with the last 3 combinations of aces. But in position, we would definitely float there with all the backdoors and deep stacks. But out of position, we'll just get the hell out of dodge. And here we get min raised by poker dust. This could be anything really. We are going to call because we have a suited ace. And on this board texture, we're just going to be checking and folding. We also got called behind by the villain who is at the same seat at this table. And there's a pot-sized bet from poker dust. And to the dust, these cards will go. King 6 of hearts, not going to be a raising combination. We get a limp from no smoking, limp behind. Good opportunity for somebody to isolate here. Texas Tater decides to just keep the limping strategy going. It looks like he posted. No one wants to raise, huh? No one wants to raise. And these are the kind of pots that you get in full ring games. Even in live games, you're going to get a lot of these weirdo 5-way limped pots where no one has initiative, and that's the interesting part. No one has initiative here, and that means somebody's got to have a leading range, and you want to be the one who gets that fold equity and also protects your weak hands, because you're going to be in a lot of these scenarios with top pair no kicker, and you're going to want to eliminate number of players in the pot and sort of reveal the strength of everyone's hand as fast as you possibly can. So you're going to definitely have a leading range in these scenarios where it doesn't make a lot of sense to in other pots where someone has raised because someone else has initiative. So you could develop a leading range for sure, but for the most part, you just have a check call, check raise, check fold range. And in the limp pots, you definitely want to have a leading range. Depending on the number of players in the pot, depending on the depth of stacks, position of the limpers, knowledge of the players, etc., etc. A lot of things to consider. We're going to be on the turn here with the 5 of spades with a half pot bet from no smoking. We'll see what Texas Tater going to do. Texas Tater could be slow playing 4x combo here. If no smoking had a 4, he's sure not happy on this river. And he checks the river. Would he check a 10? Hard to say. That'd be a real finesse play for a game like this. We got a relatively big bet from Tater. We got a check call from No Smoking with a 10. And it looks like no check raise or anything like that. But losing to very few combos. I'm kind of surprised. Big bet and call, no check raise. But I mean, you know, it's pretty difficult for him to get paid off by much other than a 4. I would assume that if you were checking a 10 there, since there's so few combos that beat you, one of quads and then pocket 5s doesn't beat you even because you have 5s full of 10s versus 10s full of 4s. So literally you're losing to, I mean, you should just be check raising there in case your opponent has a 4, obviously. So this is exactly the type of scenario we're talking about. We have a very connected board. We have top pair, no kicker, no backdoor draws. Our hand is worth a bet for protection, and then we're going to be doing a lot of checking and giving up going forward because the value of this hand is going to come from protecting it, essentially. Limiting the number of players in the pot and trying to get the showdown as quickly and cheaply as possible. Once we bet and get called by multiple opponents, we are generally just going to be checking and giving up. Especially because there's so much connectivity on the board that's going to be relatively difficult to get an unconnected card. So here, Queen 9, 7, 9, and 6, 8, and in a pinch, 5, 9 suited, all end up improving. And then we still lose to all their Queen X combos, and their flush draws have a lot of equity, and there's 2 of them. So we're just going to check this turn. We know that No Smoking is also passive enough to check call with a very nutted combo that should be check raising almost always. So there's very few combos here that we're happy to see being bet. He bets a 3rd pot. I think we kind of have to call here, but we're beat a very high percentage of the time. And that river card is obviously not a great one, but maybe it's one that'll allow us to get to showdown. If these guys don't have a 6, they fear the 6. And fuck it often has a flush draw here. But he could certainly have a 6x flush draw or a bigger queen. But he won't really be betting a queen on the river. So that's mostly just going to be a better hand than ours. It's kind of nonsense. And in these types of scenarios on the button with a suited hand, we can definitely make a case for limping behind with a hand that is going to cooler our opponents. So if we have a suited ace here, we can be raising, maybe limping on occasion if you have a guy who limp re-raises a lot, which you will get at full ring games. But something like Jack 3, I wouldn't be playing just because it gets us into trouble. And it's, you know, even though you have the button, it's not all that great. If you have like a King 6 suited or something, you're okay limping. Ace X suited, obviously, a fair limp. And then you can certainly raise that combo as well. Your better kings, you're going to be raising anyway. We're going to be limping our King Deuce here. And No Smoking did end up check calling. I don't know exactly what the hell he had, but the other guy had his 5-6, so he did make the straight on the river, which means that we very likely had the best hand a decent amount of the time on the turn, but No Smoking could have easily had a better queen, which what else is he really going to call the river with in that spot? So I'm kind of assuming that No Smoking had us beat, and that fuck it, just outdrew both of us on the river. That's a fine attitude to have. Fuck it. And not really much of a reason to be bluffing in this scenario. Very often called for one street by a 3 or a 5, a 4-way pot, pocket 4s or some shit like that. You know, we're not going to win at showdown very often either. We're just going to lose to like King 9 or some shit. And there's a guy with an 8 on the river. And we have 7-10 offsuit. We will raise it up if it folds to us, and it does. And you don't always have to raise these combos. This is a hand you can certainly fold, but if your opponents are overfolding their blinds, or if they're overfolding post-flop, then definitely raise it up. But certainly not something that you have to play every time, and the stronger your opponents are in the blinds, the more you should just be folding. So this is exactly one of those types of scenarios here, where if you're at a relatively passive table, you can limp a suited king or a suited queen in a hopes of coolering some guys. But now you have to be careful because these guys will limp their suited aces sometimes in early position. And their limping range often does include hands like ace queen as well, sometimes king queen. So you got to be a little bit careful and cognizant. But if you have a suited king and you're in the cutoff, or especially the button, sometimes the cutoff at a passive table, you can sneak into a flop and, just have very good implied odds when you do flop trips or you do make a flush. And with no backdoors or anything, we're just going to get out of here on the paired board. And again, it's not something that's going to happen nearly ever in 6-max cash games, but it definitely ends up happening in full ring. And that is one of the differences between the two. The multi-way pots, and again, you're not really going to have much of a limping range. You're never really going to be open limping, but you will limp behind on rare occasion. And when it's a high implied odds, cooler your opponent type spot, and it's cheap to sneak in, those are the times when you can just kind of peel one off. So peel a flop and see what kind of a taste we can get. Just peel off a tasty little flop. Now here's an interesting pot. We're going to fold our king 6 of diamonds, but we've got a min raise from Mac, another raise, and then a call and a call and a call. Ace 9-6 with 2 diamonds, checks over to the pre-flop raiser. He bets a smallish amount for a connected board. I would kind of assume a bigger bet here, but it does let him get most of his stack in on the turn if he wants to, as a slight overbet. Mac check jams. I'm assuming ace jack plus or a high equity draw. It looks like we had ace queen against 9s. Pretty standard. All the money's going to get in there. And the 8-3 is going to be folded. Mac just trucking people. Mac truck. Mac motherfucking truck. So Mac is again raising the villain with a minimum 3-bet like it was limit poker. I'm assuming Mac is going to call. And we get the 5-5-5. Dial it up dominoes. Delivery in 30 flops or less. Raise it up with our ace of diamonds, king of spades on the right table. Mac is going to check it. The villain, I'm assuming, is going to bet here at a high frequency. Perhaps he checks all of his ace kings. Depends on the individual strategy. Mac goes for another check raise, saying, bitch, I got pocket 9s, 10s, jacks. I've slow played aces. You ain't got no 5. Got a call here. A 6 doesn't do anything. Both players just have pairs. We're now in a 4-way pot with no backdoor draws. If we had the ace of clubs here, I would bet with the intentions of triple barreling. If we had the king of clubs here, I would bet with the intentions of often triple barreling. But once you're in a 4-way pot, checking is going to be prudent. Now, the ace is a very interesting card on the river. When they both check the turn, somebody got ace high. Maybe they both have ace king. 10s and king queen. So Mac basically said exactly what he had and then went into the passive mode on the turn. And the villain, well, he was just getting out of line. Now, on this turn card, even if we hit a king or a queen, it's going to be kind of tainted. We have 2 players behind us. There are going to be spots where king and ace king is going to be called in position. This is not going to be one of those scenarios. It's just not a great spot for us. We got multiple players in the hand behind us. The board is relatively connected. We might be drawing dead. Just not a great spot, even though the bet sizing is so small. The chosen one is going to 3-bet the button. This hand has robust playability, so we are going to call. And we are going to go from there. We are blocking ace-king down to 12 combos, but queens, kings, and aces is 15 combos, with jacks 1, so 16, and then 12. So if our opponent basically just has jacks plus, he's at a 16 versus 12 combo perspective, and that means that we're not going to have the best hand here very often. At this point, we'd rather have a 9 or something in our hand, a king or a queen, to give him, or not a king. We'd rather have a queen to give him all of his ace kings. He is giving us 2-1 though, and there are a lot of draws on the board. We're basically just beating ace-king combinations, and even ace-king of diamonds is pretty rough. Our ace isn't good. We're drawn to 2 outs when we're behind most of the time. Queens and kings, obviously, we have a little bit more equity against, but not a lot, not a 10. We have to hit an ace there. So we're just going to fold. That's not the flop we're looking for. versus a tight range. Now in a 6 max cash game, if you're the cutoff against the button, you're going to defend that flop every single time. But because of the nature of ranges and how they work in the full ring games, basically just going to end up folding that flop. A lot of other scenarios we would defend. We're going to defend the big blind here with our ace-5. If we know that our opponent is a reg, then we can also put this in our 3-betting range if we'd like to develop a 3-bet versus that position. And as it stands, we're going to check call here, though we are unhappy to do so with his big pot size bet. Probably dealing with mostly value combos or high equity draws. Obviously, we're behind his value range, and our equity from in this scenario is just going to come from him having queen jack and clubs, 7-8, whatever else. We are going to call again. That is a relatively small bet. Who knows what the pot size bet into that ends up being, but we're just going to end up being stuck calling this dude down and losing to ace jack plus. He's just making relatively small bets, which again do not end up being bluffs that often. We also don't have much of a read on our opponent other than a min 3-bet with ace queen. So we're stuck calling here versus sizing and then just losing to ace jack plus. As it stands, our opponent is getting a little bit creative with pocket sixes. So the pot size bet on the flop into the 2 small bets, perhaps a bit of uncertainty on the side of our opponent. Just didn't kind of know what to do in that scenario. King 8 becomes an easy fold. Ace 3 in the big blind, probably going to be defending. But again, a lot of the time, our opponent is going to turn over a bigger ace. His bet sizing on the turn didn't really make sense because if he's betting the flop for a pot size bet because he's afraid of the board texture, then you would assume that the same type of a thought process would go into betting the turn, and his sizing would be 2/3 or more if he was still betting with fear. So then when you think, okay, well, if he's not betting with fear, then what does the 4 do to make him less fearful? And, maybe he had turned a set of 4s with a club, or maybe he had turned 2 pair and now he has ace 4 of clubs or some weird shit like that. Obviously, very few combos, but if we're looking at his thought process, trying to find something congruent between his flop size and his turn size with the board texture, it would have to come from a lack of fear that was previously there. So if he fears the flop texture and he pots it, and then he doesn't fear the turn, it's because his hand has improved to the point where he doesn't really care that much for some reason. And that doesn't make a lot of sense in that spot, which is, and of course we have top pair and a very drawy board texture. And these are 2 reasons why we end up making the call anyway, and we're just kind of rope-a-doped. But again, you going back to our bluff with our ace 10 with a 10 of clubs earlier, that bluff didn't work. This bluff catch did end up working, and we're just going to fold here. This hand is a very dominated hand. If we had more players in the pot, we would continue here, as we do have the button. And if these players had deeper stacks, if we're like 150 big blinds deep, or even with these stacks, if your opponent's an aggressive reg, we can definitely put a 3-bet in here on occasion. But I definitely want to know that there's some reg dynamics going on before that happens. So yeah, there's a pretty bit of a disconnect between his bet sizing and what it's representing. Oh man, we would have made a flush, guys. Damn it, what the hell? But yeah, we're not going to take too much stock in any of that. We are just going to make the call that makes sense from a game theory perspective. And if we learn about our opponent enough information to make exploitative plays, then we will make those exploitative plays. And that's why you can't really be unhappy with a result. You have to look at the play, and you have to look at why you made the play. You have to look at the play, and see if it made sense from a game theory perspective. Does it make sense with all the information that you have? And if you're constantly making plays that don't make sense or end up not making sense, and then maybe that you're making too many of those bad plays, maybe you're making too many of those plays for some reason or another. And maybe that's a kink in your thought process. Obviously, we see that here, very dry board. And if you constantly find yourself making mistakes that are, I think that this is happening too much and it isn't, well, then maybe you're just diverting from balance a little bit too fast and a little bit too frequently. And that's something that you want to prevent. That's something you want to be aware of. And well, in this spot, I tend to be a little bit too loose. I tend to call down a little bit too much. Or I tend to bluff a little bit too much. So we isolate here, and we are in a 4-way pot. We do have a 7 blocking boats. We're definitely going to continuation bet here. We're not always going to have the best hand. We block pocket eights as well, which is a pretty good thing to block since that's one of the hands that will beat us here, eights, nines, tens. And we want to limit the number of players in the pot. This hand could use protection. Again, it's going to work less often than other scenarios, given the number of players in the pot, us being on a position. But it's still a bet that you're going to make. It's still going to be a profitable bet. As you can see, it worked this time. And when it doesn't work and we get called or raised, we will just deal with that at the time. You definitely want to consider what you're going to do versus calls or raises, but at the same time, even though that's going to happen at some frequency, that doesn't mean that betting isn't going to be the right play now, especially on a dry board like that where it's two callers and then a limp caller. That's often going to be a scenario where you'll see a lot of suited connectors and pocket pairs, and you're not going to see ace-king all that frequently. You're going to see king-queen and king-jack at some frequency, and you're going to see suited kings for sure. But for the most part, there's not as many of those. But yeah, don't get too attached to the results in the short term, and think about why you did what you did. And if your thought process is solid, and from a game theory perspective your play is solid, then there's a pretty good chance that you're not going to lose chips long term. Now, it doesn't mean that you couldn't have made more money by making an exploitative play, but you have to be careful not to divert from the balanced play too frequently and too quickly, because, I mean, at the end of the day, you'd like to divert from the balanced play as fast as possible because it makes you the most money. But if you just don't have the information, then you're just going to have to be patient. We're going to go ahead and half pot here. Jack with no diamond. Our hand can be outdrawn relatively quickly on this board, relatively easily. The 9 is not an amazing turn card, but we do block Jack 9 and Ace Jack. So we will consider calling a bet here against flush draws and 7-8 and 5-7 suited, even though our opponent probably has a lot of Ace-X combos, some 9X suited combos for sure. The half pot bet doesn't make us too happy, but nonetheless, we are going to check and call, because from a blocker perspective, if we're bluff catching, an ace would be a better bluff catcher because it would block his Ace-X combos, but this is also a relatively good bluff catcher. And as we can see, Mike floated a little bit light on the flop, then decided to half pot on the turn and give up on the river. So from a game theory perspective, he probably could have played that hand a little bit better. And from a game theory perspective, even though, and that's the thing, it all comes down to comfort, you know? You want to make plays that make you comfortable because you feel like they're going to be right a high percentage of the time, if not all the time, and that makes you feel good when you're playing poker. It feels like you're doing the things you're supposed to do. It feels right. You're not used to, the human brain is not used to getting a negative result like losing a hand and then having a feeling of correctness. It's very difficult because it feels like that's not correct. I got a negative result, so whatever I did wasn't correct. You got slapped in the hand, so how could I have done something correct? Unless you're one of those weirdos that likes getting slapped in the hand, that's a whole other thing. But that's the thing, is that you have to kind of disconnect from the results and then look at the play and say, why did I make this play? What was my thought process? What were all the elements of this play? And then does it make sense from a game theory perspective? If I made an exploitative play, did I have enough information to make a good exploitative play? If I did and I was wrong this time, I want to double check and make sure I think I have that exploitative information. And if that's the case, I'm just going to have to accept the fact that I made this play and it didn't work, and I perhaps could have still made the correct play and it didn't work out. There's a lot of that mental struggle in poker, and it creates a lot of uncertainty for players, which creates a lot of mental turmoil. They could turn a normal downswing into a bigger downswing, start slipping with the A game. A lot of negative things can kind of creep in. So, my suggestion to you would be take the results and take the hands that you've played and review them after you have no emotional connection to them. So that means if you just play a session and it was down 3 buy-ins, whatever, you played about 1,000 hands, not a very good session, don't review those hands for a couple of days. Take those hands and review them at the beginning of next week, because you're not going to have any emotional attachment to them. You're going to look at them the next day or look at them that day, and you're going to be all emotional. Well, I think this play was all right. I remember this guy. He was doing all kinds of weird shit. You know, this guy, this is a special guy right here. This is kind of a goddamn guy doing this and that. And maybe you're right to some extent. But if you look at that next Monday and you played on a Wednesday, chances are you're not going to have any emotional connection to that. And you're going to look at that play and go, what the hell was I doing? What could my thought process have been? Why did I do this? I think this is a better play now. I think this is a better play on average, and it'll kind of help you review your play more efficiently because you won't have that connection emotionally to what you've just done. So I find it better to just kind of review your play a little bit later, you know, a few days later, get rid of the emotional connection. We got him to ace deuce. We are going to fold this combo in the cutoff. Doesn't play very well. Lacks a lot of playability this hand. Not a lot of playability on this one. A lot of poker is just patience. You know, it's patience. You don't win long-term in poker by winning a bunch of hands in a row or having like 2 great sessions in a row. The thing about it is if you take poker seriously and you're in it for the long term, you're going to go through swings from day to day. You're going to be up money, you're going to be down money, could be up 5 buy-ins, could be down 5 buy-ins. It doesn't matter. You just strive to make the best decision that you can with the information at hand, be it exploitative or balanced, and let the hours bring the chips to you, you know? And if you're still trying to get better, then putting work in, you know, whatever sort of a 80-20 split, whatever you want to do. The better you get at poker, the less you'll learn from a lot of training resources. You'll just be looking for nooks and crannies because so much of poker, I wouldn't necessarily say is standard, but once you have a pretty good grasp of the fundamentals, then everything else is going to lie in the nooks and the crannies. Bet sizing on the turn, bet sizing on the river, what combo you called with on the turn or the river, when you decided to make an exploitative play and whether or not that was correct. A lot of these things. We've been playing here for a damn hour. We're going to go for a couple of minutes. We'll just run it to the blinds on table 2, and then we'll wrap it up for today, folks. But I hope you guys got some good information out of this. You know, just how to approach poker in general and how to not be results oriented, essentially. It's very important. So here we have a limped pot, and our hand is going to be the best hand a decent amount of the time. So we're going to go ahead and make a 2/3 bet. We don't have any backdoor draws. Again, it's a kind of scenario like that queen deuce hand where our hand is best some, but the board can get real scary and there's a lot of players. I don't think he's necessarily check calling an ace a lot, so that means he could have a better 7, a worse 7. Maybe he's got a gut shot or something, and he could also have 3x. So I think our hand is still ahead enough against that range to bet the turn, and we're mostly just going to be checking back the river. A paired queen is relatively good for us. If he leads the river, it's going to be relatively strange. It's either an ace that is afraid of missing out on value, or perhaps a missed draw. But again, it's hard to say exactly what his thought process is. We know that he's slow played before. I'm not exactly sure. I'm going to end up calling here just because we're getting a decent price. We're not blocking straight draws or flush draws. Well, I guess I timed out even though I hit more time. We were going to call that river for those reasons because from a game theory perspective, if our opponent's bluffing, it's going to be with flush draws and straight draws, and we don't block any of those. And if he's value betting, obviously we're going to lose to Queen X of Hearts. We're going to lose to Ace X either way. But we do block some boats, and we don't block any of his bluffs. So I think that enough is lined up to call this 60-cent bet. Getting the 3 and change to 1. This is not the same scenario. We're in a limped pot, but we have third pair on a very connected board. So this, to me, it kind of eclipses where if this was 9, if this 9 was a deuce, then I would be okay leading out here in some cases, checking if we had a backdoor flush draw. But in this scenario, out of position to 3 players with a very connected board, we're just going to check and fold. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you guys have had a great time with me here. Don't forget to check out GlobalPoker and the good tournaments they have there and the cash games. Don't be afraid to play some full ring as well. And I'll see you guys sometime soon, man. I'll catch you guys on the flip side.